introduce you to one of the great enduring leaders of excellence, innovation, culture, business, and digital transformations that you're going to come across. Mr. Brou Gautier is the director of the Air Force's Spark Tank event and leads the Continuous Process Improvement and Innovation Division at the Department of the Air Force headquartered in Washington, D.C. As the Air Force's continuous improvement and innovation lead, he is responsible for the development, training, and deployment of continuous process improvement and innovation concepts across the entire department in a way that fosters innovation, solves performance issues, and transforms the culture with a particular emphasis on end-to-end processes. Prior to his current role, Mr. Gautier was a commissioned officer and pilot in the U.S. Air Force and a consultant and business director for a privately held Lean Six Sigma company. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Brou Gautier, please.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank
you very much. Good morning, everyone. As my friend Adam said, let's try that again. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's cavernous in here, and I can hear this big echo, so hopefully that doesn't throw us off a little bit. Thank you for Jose for that wonderful introduction. I hope to live up to that. It's always hard to follow Lee Cockrell. He's been a mentor and advisor for government organizations, including Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and the Air Force. We used to have, when he was just retired from Disney, we had him in to a program that the Disney Institute taught for our Air Force general officers and senior executive leaders. And just an amazing story. And we're actually going to touch on a little bit of that as we get through our presentation. So first, let me just show a little bit of the disclaimer here. Public affairs and the lawyers, make sure that you see the bottom thing in the bottom right corner. These are my observations and my lessons learned, and they don't represent the official position of the United States Air Force, the United States Space Force, the Department of Defense, and all the other people who want to be protected by those kinds of things. So let's go with, let's see, I think I have the control here. Let me go to the next one. We'll get right into it. I noticed that they put some barriers up here. I'm hoping, I'm not going to take offense to that they think I'm getting to where I'm losing my balance and I might fall off stage, but it's probably a good thing. So here's the challenge with government, right? Business is in business to make a profit. But government isn't in business to make a profit. Government is in business to serve the people. And there's an interesting notion about government is we are like the ultimate not-for-profit. And you have to put that in quotes, right? Because if we don't get the revenue that we need, they'll make more revenue, or they'll pass laws or do something. And we have the President of the United States, Chief Executive Officer. We have 535 members of Congress that we all vote and elect into power, and they give us some constraints because they control the budgets and the appropriations. So what they do is they set the funding limits for us, and we don't always get what we ask. So what that really means is you have to recognize that for all of the things that everyone in DC does, there's a fixed budget. And in that fixed budget, it doesn't give you 100% of what you asked for. And there's a list of unfunded prioritized requirements that's already there. We know what we're going to do for the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years because our planning choices take us out that far. So it's already prioritized. And that's important because I'm going to come back to that later. So the overarching principle that we're trying to get to here is how can we make the most of this set amount of funding while lowering the risk and cost of what we do? Enter in the concepts of operational excellence, performance excellence. Ultimately, you want to make sure that it's not a conversation about accounting. It's about your capabilities. It's about capacity. I can share with you that my friends in the Army only deployed Lean Six Sigma in what they call combat support arms. Combat support arms are not the warfighters. Combat support arms are supply troops and logisticians and human resources and financial management, all the kind of the back shop stuff that doesn't have to do with the operational side of the military. And why do you think that is? Primarily, it's because they're afraid of these concepts becoming overly bureaucratized, if you will. And you have some little bean counter come up and go, you know, On average, it shows that every trip outside the wire, you encounter 1.7 bad guys and you expend 14,000 rounds of ammunition. And that's a little excessive. And we think if you dialed that ammunition number back down, then you could be more effective outside the wire. You could stay outside longer. And they're like, go away. I'm not interested. Go away with your efficiency stuff because I'm about being effective. So there's this trade-off, right? They've built in this big bias and trade-off for efficiency and effectiveness. And ultimately, that creates some biases, some walls to better performance inside, internal barriers to performance improvement inside the departments. So this focus on performance excellence and operational excellence really is a conversation about how do you overcome those biases and those barriers and get to a point where you can be effective and not have the efficiency thing come up at all, right? That's what we're all about, is improving the effectiveness. And it's about all of our assets, our people, our capital equipment, our processes, managing process as a resource. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And at the same time, you know, we have to build some capability. There's opportunities for businesses to support the Department of Defense, the Department of the Air Force, the United States Air Force, the United States Space Force. We have two services now. The Space Force is celebrating their 2nd birthday this week. The Air Force in 2022 will be celebrating its 75th birthday. So we're not in the geriatric league yet with our older services, the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Army, but we're trying. We think a little faster. At the speed of light, at the speed of heat, as they say. So we're going to go through this a little faster now, as we see most people, when they think of the Air Force and Space Force, they typically think of these things. And I would just say that this is really representative of the operational capability that we have, right? The Air Force isn't necessarily about that. And I'll just say that that picture in the upper left corner for you is a C-17 aircraft with 823 refugees on board from the recent evacuation operations, emergency evacuation operations in Kabul, Afghanistan. 823. The airplane's designed for about 250 safely. They did what was necessary to make the mission happen. That's operational excellence. You have to empower your people to look at the conditions around you and to make the right choices to make the mission happen to the best of their ability. 823 people on board an aircraft is only designed to carry about 250. So do you think they got in trouble? Do you think that they had to answer all kinds of questions after the fact from all the operational commanders and the lawyers? No, because they had set up ahead of time all those conversations, and they said, make the mission happen safely to the best of your ability. And that was the result. With stellar trust in their people produces stellar results. But in reality, I would just say that the Air Force and the Space Force are far bigger than just those capabilities or the effects that we produce, right? We're a global organization. I was being a little coy in one of our seminars yesterday when somebody asked what organizations we belong to, and I said I belong to a little organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. And they just took that as a grain of salt. Okay, next guy, let's go to your thing. And it's kind of funny because I think if you ranked us, if you looked at terms of size and footprint, we're probably Fortune 1, tied with the Army. Army's more personnel than we have, but I think we have a bigger footprint and more constant operations. So in reality, how big is that? Well, it's about 700,000 people. 700,000 people in the Air Force and Space Force, and we have a global footprint. We have aircraft taking off about every 23 seconds somewhere in the world, and we monitor and manage that constantly. That's busier than O'Hare and Atlanta and all of that globally. It's all managed. It all works. The people who do those operational processes, they're pursuing operational excellence. The benefit of being in the Air Force is we're not necessarily tied to that discussion about effectiveness and efficiency, that false internal debate, because we know that we all have to achieve the best we can with the resources that we're given. And we still have our unfunded requirements, and that comes into play. The thing I do want to point out to you, though, is that 160 different skill sets. How many of you recognize that as Lee Cockrell said, every employee is valuable because you pay them? I mean, they wouldn't be there if they weren't valuable. They're performing some service. We have 160 different types of employees. How many of you knew that we had dental technicians that are Air Force airmen and Space Force guardians? How many of you knew that we had firefighters? How many of you knew that we have civil engineers? How many of you knew that we have hurt locker guys whose job it is to run up to bombs and make sure that they don't hurt other people? How many of you knew that we have maintainers? Obviously, that kind of goes with the flying mission. But that one in the middle, one of those non-combatant evacuation aircraft that from the Kabul emergency, how many of you paid attention to the news cycle where you saw that we had a medical team on board that airplane and they actually delivered a baby on board a United States Air Force C-17 aircraft? They actually had landed already, but delivery was nigh, and they didn't have time for the ambulance to get there. They delivered the baby on board. We had medical professionals who were airmen who did that work. So we have a really rich skill set across operations, mission support, medical, and maintenance career fields that's just absolutely amazing. And we did have a discussion earlier. I always have a picture of a dog in my presentations. I think Matt out in the back from we were talking about, do you have a dog in your presentation? People are supposed to like that better, the presentation. So thank you in advance for liking my presentation. There is a dog. But the reason I show you the dog is because here's another facet of the Air Force's mission. How many of you knew that the Air Force was the primary trainer of all working dogs, bomb dogs, drug dogs, for the entire federal government? Customs and Border Patrol get their trained dogs from the United States Air Force. So one of those specialties is veterinarians. We have veterinarians, we have veterinarians assistants who help take care of our platoons, if you will, of canines. It's an amazing capability. Most people don't think about the Air Force in that way. So I want to help you reshape a little bit about when you hear Air Force and Space Force, it's really about the cities that run the ports from which we launch our operational capability. And you see airplanes and rockets and satellites, and you turn on your car and you put your Google Map or your Apple Maps in, and you get GPS uploaded directions or accuracy directions so you can get to where you want to go. And that's the Air Force and Space Force that manage those constellations of satellites and put them up there, right? So we're embedded in a lot of different things that most people don't even recognize. And we have operational excellence processes that deliver all of those results. So how do I affect that from my one little cubicle in a small corner of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C.? The first thing is we have to have some big words and some North Stars, right? I want to have my Polaris. Polaris is a recurring theme in both the Air Force and Space Force because it's provided navigational guidance to people throughout time. It doesn't change. It's always north. So one of our big goals is achieve maximum productivity from every dollar. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing in there about you have to carry fewer bullets, you have to extend your time outside the wire, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's, are you being productive with the assets you have? Because that's the important thing. Minimize no value added burden. That's the tough one, and we'll get into that in just a second. Minimize no value added burden. One of the biggest things that we have to deal with every day is when people equate, I worked hard today. You get home and you say, man, I'm just mentally exhausted. I really worked hard. And they're looking at that and they're going, that hard work had to be valuable, right? Because it was hard. Is that, and I'm just going to ask you, show of hands, how many of you think that hard work equals value? Yeah, one person. Not true, right? Thank you for participating in that. He was just humoring me. Right, hard work does not necessarily equal value, but how many people will appreciate that what work they do isn't necessarily valued by, isn't necessarily necessary for the work to happen, for the outcome to be produced? That's hard. It's hard to have that conversation with people, right? And Lee talked a little bit about that, and we'll get to that in just a second here as well. So when you talk about burden, you have to recognize that we have 700,000 employees, and they have a ton of stuff going on. And looking at all of that's personal. All those thoughts are personal. We carry with us personal stuff every day. In part, our jobs kind of just are helping us pay the bills to deal with all of that burden that's up there, to help us do what we want to do, what's important to us in our lives. So what's the connection then to what we're doing? Well, the important thing is when you start talking operational excellence, you can get in this conversation about productivity. And how many of you have heard, you want me to do more with less? How do you deal with that? Right? Is it doing more with less? My friend Adam Lawrence down here would tell me that no, when you successfully deploy the Lean Six Sigma toolkits, the continuous improvement and innovation toolkits, you'll essentially do less with less because you're throwing them out all the non-value added stuff. But guess what? Somebody was doing that non-value added stuff. So what do you do with them? If you don't have your exit strategies built up front, you might lose some folks and you might get them to check out and they might start actively, but yet subconsciously undermining what you're doing. That makes our jobs a little harder. And so we have to understand and get to why that exists. So people ask me really what my role is. And my role isn't necessarily to teach Lean Six Sigma skill sets anymore. My role isn't necessarily to design the best way to do anything. My role is this. And how many of you think that that looks futile? One person against a culture for 700,000 people, and we're changing it. The thing the ace I've got in my pocket, though, is that the Air Force was actually born out of continuous improvement. We've been thinking about change constantly since way early in our inception, since the Wright brothers first put an airplane up and we had Army soldiers thinking about how they could advance our capabilities. That's amazing. So I want to show you this. This is not a bullseye, although it kind of looks like that. It's not a bomb sight, but it is about improvement and innovation. How many of you swear by the lean methodologies? A few? How many of you swear by Six Sigma methodologies? How many of you swear by the OODA loop? How many of you even know what the OODA loop is? The father of the F-16, Colonel John Boyd, created the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. How many of you swear by the PDCA or the PDSA cycles? How many of you teach that? How many of you do design thinking and you use this technique on the outer ring called DDRFSI? Discovery, design, relevance, feasibility, sustainability, and impact. How many of you are doing the design thinking exercises using a methodology like that? How much of your time is spent understanding what methodology somebody was using to come up with something that you're talking about that day? How much of a 30-minute meeting is consumed just understanding the framework that was used? We had a significant amount of it. So we in the Air Force about 15 years ago designed a practical problem-solving model designed to remove the Japanese words from the conversation, designed to remove the Toyota words from the conversation, designed to remove the Army words from the conversation, designed to remove Jack Welch's GE and Motorola Six Sigma words from the conversation, and just to talk about problem solving. This basic human need to see something, recognize that it's not immediately attainable, understand that I want to go do it. How do I make that happen? What's the problem? And so this, thanks to Kimberly Lynn Consulting, she was very kind enough to draw a cartoon graphic of what's in my brain most days, and to help you understand a little better what I'm talking about with this. And I think I have the word that says danger. It must be laser. Something must be laser here. There we go. So let's start up here at step one. Clarify and validate the problem. The culture that we faced 10 years ago was one where in Air Combat Command, it took them 6 months to get the problem statement. 6 months. And we were working on a readiness issue for one of their aircraft. And the problem statement that they finally presented for approval to the commander of Air Combat Command was, the Air Combat Command and the Combat Air Forces appreciate the opportunity to improve upon the already robust capabilities of the F-22 fifth generation fighter aircraft. So let me ask you, where's the problem in that statement? It wasn't immediately relevant, but I was trying to understand why, and somebody gave me the clue. The clue was, in that culture, they weren't allowed to use the word no or any derivation of it. So they couldn't say that they're not capable. They couldn't say that they're not able to produce the missions that they're required to fly. They couldn't say that. And if they couldn't say it, then there is no problems. You know, that's backstage stuff. That's not show center stuff. And that's an interesting culture to have to work around. So I would just encourage you to think through that and be cognizant and aware that some organizations, that's an issue. Whatever they say up front at show center isn't necessarily representative of what the real problem is. So you have to dig deeper. The second thing, show me the data, right? Trust in God, but verify. Everybody else bring data. General Norton Schwartz, when he took over as the Air Force Chief of Staff, he said one of the most critical things of the bureaucracy, the staff bureaucracy I've ever heard. And he said, when you come to me for a decision, for a meeting, you're going to come from me for one of two types of meeting. It's an information meeting or a decision meeting. And you have to tell me up front which one it is. If it's an info meeting, you come in, you say what you need to say, and you get out. I'm a busy dude. If it's a decision meeting, then you're going to tell me why we're there. Whoops. You're going to tell me why we're there. Then you're going to show me the data. And this was the critical thing. And I want to see all the data, not just the data that supports your preferred solution. Context. He was begging for context, and he was throwing the staff under the bus because the staff was not providing full disclosure, if you will. So understanding data in full context is an important and critical capability for decision making. The next thing he said is, then you're going to tell me about where we're trying to go. You're going to tell me why the data are. And that's a complete sentence, by the way, data are. And if you don't understand that, that's like a whole nother hour lecture from someone. But data are. And then this, you know, tell me why the data are. Then tell me what we're going to go do about it. Then go do it. Now, we have a lot of people in our culture who want instant gratification. That's no different when you're in the business of operational excellence or continuous improvement. They want it now. But unfortunately, not everything can be a just do it. Sometimes it takes time. You need a rapid improvement event. How many of you do a rapid improvement event in a week? How many weeks does it take to prepare for a 1-week rapid improvement event? Multiple weeks. How many weeks afterward the fact does it take to make sure that they don't go backwards? So a 1-week rapid improvement event is not a 1-week rapid improvement event. It's a much bigger investment in time, right? So then how many of you have done full-scale projects? Those in the software development world do that a lot. How many of you build prototypes and you're like inventing and creating something new to see if it works? Building a prototype alone takes time. Testing it and making sure it works before you fully deploy it, that takes time. So there's a lot to this stuff. But when General Schwartz did this, he walked right through the first 5 steps of this program and said, then I'll make a decision to commit the resources, you go do your thing, and then you make sure it had the effects that you needed. And as I've heard in the last couple of days, the answer is yes, because if the problem is important enough to dedicate people to solving it, the answer has to be yes to whatever the resources are it takes to fix it. And if not, they probably weren't ready for you to do that, fix that particular problem. So when you come into an organization that's 700,000 big, the problems that you're taking to a 4-star general are not easy to do problems. The problems you're taking to a 1-star general aren't easy to do problems. The problems you're taking to a lieutenant colonel and colonel aren't easy problems. They're just smaller in scope. And then they exist all over the place. So steps 7 and 8, check to make sure it worked, and then standardize and move it across the enterprise as best as possible. And that brings up the issue of standard work. We made a point in a seminar yesterday. Standard work is a local thing. How many of you have operating locations, multiple operating locations? How many of you in those multiple operating locations have the exact same setup and tooling and kit at all your locations, such that you can define standard work for the entire enterprise and deploy it the same way everywhere? Right. Most people don't. And so I would say that when you think about that kind of stuff, standard work is a local standard, and it's important to know what it is and evaluate here's the same process at location A, B, C, and D. Got it? This one is the best of those. I'm not going to say best practice. I'm going to say this is the leading practice. And you don't all have to do it that way, but you need to know why you're different. And that's going to come important here in just a second as I go through the next set of slides. Why we have these people. The people in the corner. How many of you have taken Myers-Briggs? How many of you have taken the colors personality test? How many true colors? Yeah, that's a good one too. Very easy if you want to do that as part of your facilitation techniques. Highly recommended, because you have to help people know themselves before you can help them, before they can really help each other, to know each other. And then we're going to address that here in just a second as well. Dr. Jeff DeGraff from the University of Michigan, the Dean of Innovation, if you will, in his book, the Innovation Code, talks about 4 different personality types. It's very analogous to true colors. Essentially, there's competitive, creative, collaborative, and controlling. And so it's important to understand that these people exist. The 4 personality types exist. And I put them in those corners, not necessarily for any rhyme or reason, but their relationship to each other is important. So I'll just start with the collaborative people. We want to make sure every voice is heard. Every voice is important. Let's make sure that we go around the room. Talking feather, only one person with the talking feather gets to talk, that kind of thing. The competitive people, how many competitive people have time for that? 0.0, exactly right. So they're in dynamic tension with each other, because the competitive people are, after about the second person they've heard, are like, I've already made my mind up. Next. But the collaborative people is trying to say, we don't know what we don't know, so let's keep exploring here. We might hear something else. And so there's a dynamic tension there. The other dynamic tension is between our creative people and our controlling people. In the Air Force, I'll just say that the vast majority of our personnel are controlling people, right? They have regulations and instructions that tell you how you must do the standard work, and it's important. But the creative people, they don't care about instructions. As a matter of fact, they excel outside the lines. And so they're in tension with each other. These guys are trying desperately to get these guys into play. So the real cultural issues at play here are about keeping all 4 of these, just like Avengers, they all have different strengths and weaknesses, but together they make formidable teams. So if you want to help your teams do really well, it's important to understand who's at the table, what personality types they have, and force them to work together for best effect. Q12. We're short on time, so I'm just going to go really briefly through this. I talked about it at the last, at the virtual or BTOES last year, and I'll just say, if you haven't heard of the Gallups Q12, these are the 12 statistically significant questions that go into employee satisfaction. It boils down to really 2 concepts. Do you believe that the work you do is of value to the organization? And do you believe that the work you do is valued by the organization? If you don't believe either of those 2 things, as Lee said earlier this morning, you will not be happy, right? And so we need to get past that. So you can Google those and you'll find out that, that's an important thing. We've always done it this way. There are a lot of controlling people who are wed to that statement, right? But when you build a culture of continuous improvement and innovation, that cannot be sacrosanct. So we have to move past it, and we do. Again, as I alluded to earlier, we were born out of change. We were born out of a technology that was created that really advanced the capabilities, and we knew the Army was proving that they couldn't manage it by themselves. The Space Force was born 2 years ago for much the exact same reason. There's much more at stake at that. So the question is we're all thinking about change, but are we aligned and connected and thinking like in the enterprise? And the answer is no. So why is that? This is an important slide because, like Simon Sinek said, you need to start with why. This cognitive bias codex is one of the best resources I've ever seen. John Manoogian III and Buster Benson put this together, and it really is very helpful to help people understand themselves and their coworkers, their colleagues. It presents here, the inner ring are all of the biases, 188 or so biases that we encounter inside our brains and where they come from, limbic system, prefrontal cortex, all that good stuff. Because that helps you understand, is it a sense of belonging thing at the center and core of our being? Or am I attacking that? Or am I going after something that's a logical thing? All of that will help you be like a ninja consultant to get in, diagnose what's going on, help them get where they need to be, and then move off into a productive world without necessarily having you be there. So you can stealthily sneak out of the back. So I'll just say that we have 4 lines of efforts that we've built up to help get after this. Very broad policy and governance tells people where the North Star is and gets us out after it. We develop airmen, guardians, and practitioners. And I separate and distinguish that for an important reason. How many green belts, black belts, master black belts in the room? You're consultants, right? If you're internal employed by the government, you're still a consultant, you're just not an external consultant. And that creates some interesting behaviors. I've seen commanders go, I've got this problem. Go get me one of those black belt guys to come in here and fix this thing. And they come in and they do it and they don't get the results they want. And they say, oh, you obviously weren't the right guy. Go get me another guy and bring the other guy in here and do this. And they'll keep changing out guys. And what's the problem with that? The problem is they don't own the work. They don't own the problem. They know they're accountable for the results, but they're not actively getting their hands dirty and doing it themselves and leading from the front lines. So there's an important piece of that. We're actually going towards airmen and guardians, with the help of one of your visitors in your displayers, your sponsors in the next room. We've produced, we've trained how many, Rob? Almost 7,000 green belts in the last 2 years. Over 20,000 total enrolled in just 2 years' time. There's a thirst for the knowledge. Why? Because what we're doing with our policy and governance is we're trying to make it to where they're actually accountable for knowing their work and improving their work on autopilot, right? I don't have the time to be there and micromanage every one of those tens of thousands of processes that make our Air Force mission happen. What I can do, though, is describe and document the managing process as a resource, give them a baseline reference. And that's one quick last important point that I want to share with you as my time's running out, is that we're transforming this ecosystem because we're trying to give people a different resource. What I've noticed is that this unbridled effort, as people are ideating all over the place, we're developing folks, as they're going all over the place, they're inventing and thinking stuff and they're requesting new resources to do the new thing. And commanders often don't have a second data point, right? They don't know whether or not they're the best in the world at this or not. They just know what they see, and they know that it could be better, and so they may resource that issue. But how many people would resource that issue, that fix, if they knew that they were already the best in the world at it? It might then take a lower prioritization in your decision-making queue, right? So it's all about providing a second data point so that you can have a trend line and understand where you are in comparison to similar functions. And that is a piece of competitive and performance intel that we don't have, and we're building it out in our managing resources piece. And I see Jose's on his feet, so I'll speed through the last of these. We get the Spark Tank program we have is just like Shark Tank. We give airmen and guardians the opportunity to in-run the entire bureaucracy and come up with a way to get their voices heard. And just like we used an airplane to sink a battleship back then, they're thinking about ways that we can advance our capabilities today. From using Xbox gaming headsets, Oculus headsets, to download real-time fighter aircraft data and the post-mission debrief, so they can put that on and see exactly play-by-play what they had in an AR, VR workspace, to just simply taking and doing some mechanical maintenance tasks. To this one, they solved a problem that produces, it's 6 times smaller, 14 times lighter, 85% less expensive to operate, and 50% less manpower required to put this fuel system in theaters for expeditionary capability, as opposed to sending all those fuel trucks in the background. That's our airmen thinking about constantly, 24/7, 365, how do we get to operational excellence? And let me just say that while I didn't forecast any of that, I can say that I know it's going to happen because we designed it to happen. The real struggles is about managing and prioritizing our resources, because we can't make every one of these happen. We have to show then some prioritization and get after it that way. So that's the real struggle and opportunity. And then where would this culture change lead us? We're not sure. But like the Matrix, I think it's openly able to be defined. And with that, if I can get that goal, I would say that that's my role, and then hopefully that's my goal. That's my end state. And it's all about converting it from a me to a team. And if I can get all of us moving against that culture in the same direction, I'm positive we'll move that mountain at least a nanometer. Thinking differently, accelerating change. I think we don't have time for questions, but if there are any, enter them in the app, and I will get back to you with an answer. Thank you for your time this morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brou Gautier, what a fantastic journey, Brou. Thank you for sharing that with us.